Hello history lovers, and welcome to the Henricus Craft Chat. I'm your host Nicole. If you've been to Henricus Historical Park before on a field trip, you might know me as Miss Nicole, or if you've seen me portray a character, it was probably Mistress Alice Proctor. Henricus is a fully functioning living history museum that focuses on the early colonization of Virginia by the English and also on the Powhatan Indian tribe that was in the area. My focus is of English women from around the time of 1620. Now, while at work, I am wearing full historical dress, and I often get a lot of questions from visitors about what my outfit is made of, is it uncomfortable, and how it all goes together. So today, I thought it would be fun to show you how I get dressed as a 17th century woman, and then I'll give you a simple craft that you can do at home with just a few pieces of fabric and a needle and thread. So let's get started. First and foremost, we'll need a shift. A shift is made of linen, and it's basically a long nightshirt. This garment was very similar for men and women, with women's having a little bit more decoration. It's your base layer, as well as a pair of wool socks, and they didn't have elastics back then, so the socks are tied below the knee with a pair of knit wool garters. Next comes what I would call the main part of the outfit, the body petticoat. It's made from wool lined with canvas on top and decorated with bias tape. The petticoat is the skirt, which is attached to the bodies, meaning the top portion. Depending on the status of the person wearing this outfit, body petticoats could have boning in them, typically whalebone or reeds that make them stiffer. But if this is being worn for working on a farm, it's completely acceptable for them not to have any boning in them at all. When I made this one, I intended it to be a bit fancier than my normal dress, so I added some reed boning and also concealed the lacing with a separate overlap so that when it's completely laced up, it meets directly in the middle. This part takes the longest. It's also worth it to note that laces of this time period were spiral laced, not laced in a crisscross pattern that you're probably used to seeing. Then we have our apron, and don't forget your handy kitchen knife. Aprons could be made from linen or wool. Mine is linen with some blue trim and blackwork embroidery on the bottom. The peachy color could be achieved by using a plant dye called madder, which gave varying shades of red and orange and was cheap enough that most people could afford it. Now, depending on what you're doing throughout the day, you could stop here, but if it's cold out or if you're trying to be more proper, you could wear sleeves. There are several examples in paintings of the period that show dresses with detachable sleeves that pin at the shoulders with a straight pin. To cover the top portion of your shift, you can add a partlet. Partlets came in different colors and styles, and if you're being fancy, you could add a neck ruff. This is a simple one that buttons down the front with hook and eyes. Now let's not forget our head covering, which in this period is called a coif. My hair is on the shorter side, as many modern styles are, so as a cheat, I wear an elastic headband with clips to pin the coif to. In the period, longer hair was braided in two braids that were crisscrossed over the top of the head and secured in place with ribbons. I'll put a link down below to some instructions for that if you're curious. If after all this you're still cold, you can add a jacket. This style of jacket was called a gown and was made of wool lined with canvas. And there you have it. There are plenty of other styles and accessories you can add depending on status and function, but this is something a common woman might be seen in. And now for the crafty portion of our show. As I showed you, coifs were a common head covering for English women, but they could be made in lots of different styles. For a while now, I've been wanting to make myself a pointy style coif like the ones that show up in some of the woodcuts from the 1640s. To our modern eyes, they look slightly witchy, and I'll admit to especially wanting to wear it in October. But in the period, it seems to have been just another style that was worn. I think they're super fun, and I've just always wanted to make one. Here's a surviving example of one of these coifs from the early 16th or late 17th century. As you can see, this one has beautiful embroidery in a style known as blackwork, using metallic threads, and is trimmed in lace. It also has 2 ties, and that's what we're going to add to ours to keep it in place. There was also an article of clothing called a forehead cloth or a cross cloth that could be worn under or over the coif. If it was worn over, that might also give you that pointed look. This one is decorated with blackwork, but they could be plain linen. So I'm going to show you how to make one of these as well. Lastly, here's an example of a coif that's opened up so you can see what the pattern looks like when laid flat. This one has blackwork embroidery, and if you know how to embroider, that would be a really nice touch to add, but I'm only going to focus on the construction today. Here's the pattern we'll be working with. It can be found online in a living history article from the Marquess of Winchester's Regiment, and I'll put a link to that in the description box. Alright, so for this project, you're going to want a few supplies. First of all, your fabric. I'm using a medium weight white linen because that's what would have been used in the time period. But if you don't have linen at home, or you just want to make something for fun or practice, then really any white fabric will do. I would stay away from synthetics if you're able, so if you have cotton lying around, that would be fine too. And you're going to cut a square that is anywhere from 9 by 9 to 11.5 by 11.5. This one is the bigger size, and that's just preference on how big you want the cross cloth to be, how big your head is. And this is going to make 2 cross cloths or forehead cloths by cutting it on a diagonal, and I'll get 2 out of this. And the other piece is for the coif, and for this one, I cut a piece that is about 18 by 24 inches. I gave myself a little bit extra. I probably won't need that much. And this is linen as well. You're also going to want some cord or bias tape. So that's going to be to tie the cross cloth and the coif on. You're going to want a sewing needle, some straight pins, if you prefer to use a thimble, seam ripper in case you mess up. I'm going to be using this linen thread, and when you use linen thread, you need a cake of beeswax, or if you don't have beeswax, you can use a bar of soap to run it through so it makes it easier to work with. If you don't have this at home, then any white all-purpose thread will do. That's just fine. You want something to mark your pattern and your fabric with. So I like to use chalk or a soft pencil to mark on my fabric, and that way it washes out easily. And the Sharpie is for my pattern. I wouldn't ever put this on the actual fabric because it's permanent. Some craft scissors and some scissors that are just for fabric. Make sure you don't mix those up, very important. And you're also going to want a ruler and a large sheet of paper or newsprint if you have it available for transferring your pattern. I've gone ahead and cut out my pattern and laid it on top of my fabric and traced around it. Now, I should preface this by saying that I am by no means a seamstress, but I do enjoy sewing, and I've done a fair bit of it, so I have learned a few tricks. And I think if you're nervous about getting started, it doesn't have to be perfect. Just go for it. You can use some fabric that is just scrap or not high quality, expensive fabric right away, and that's a good way to get started. Also, before you cut anything out, remember to always pre-wash your fabrics on the highest setting that they can go and dry them as well. Unless it's wool, don't ever put wool in the dryer. You will find out the hard way that that's how you make felt, and it will shrink up whatever you've made. So always, if you wash wool, just hang it up to dry. But for most everything else, you can wash and dry it before you start working with it, and that way you know that it won't shrink anymore once you've made your finished piece. I also am not great at ironing, as you saw from the last video with the clips of me getting dressed. So apologies that this looks so wrinkled. I will try again later. But for right now, it is pressed and it is pre-washed and it is ready to cut out and begin sewing. So that's what I'm going to do. I've got a scrap piece of linen here, and before we get started, there are 2 stitches that I want you to know that you're going to need for this project. I'll be using purple thread just to show you so you can actually see what I'm doing, but when I stitch the actual project, I'll be using white thread. And the 2 stitches are a running stitch and a felling stitch. We're going to start off with the running stitch. I always like to double my thread and knot it at the end before I get started. And a running stitch is probably the one you already know. It's very simple. It's just in through the front side of the fabric and up through the back side of the fabric, like so. If you make your stitches wider during this stitch, then it's called a basting stitch, and you can use that just to tack things in place temporarily. But if you want to do something like seams that's actually going to hold, you're going to want to make your stitches as small as you possibly can. And in the 17th century, of course, they didn't have sewing machines, so they're going to be making their stitches extremely small, which takes a little bit of practice. And one way you can do this is to try to just catch a few threads of your fabric with the tip of your needle, poke it all the way through, and then kind of accordion your fabric over the needle. And you can do it a few times, and then pull it through. And it goes a little bit faster. Mine aren't so good, I need some more practice. But you can do a few at a time and try to make them very small. And you can use the warp and weft threads of your fabric. If you have fabric like linen where the vertical threads and the horizontal threads are very visible, you can use those as a guide to try to make your stitches straight. Sometimes. And there you go. If you want to make the running stitch a little bit stronger, if you have a seam that's going to be holding a lot more weight, then you can do something called a running back stitch. You're probably not going to need this for the coif, but I'll show it to you anyway. You'll do a few running stitches and then a back stitch. So you've gone forwards and then you're going to go back in, just double back a little bit, and then when you come up, just come up a few millimeters in front of the last stitch that you did, and then you can do your running stitch again. So that's called a running back stitch. So come a few running stitches, double back, and come up again to do your next running stitch. The next thing I want to show you is a felling stitch. This is also called a whip stitch or a hem. And this is for when you need to hem a project and fold over and conceal the raw edge. And then if this were the inside of your project and this was the outside, and you didn't want to see very much of your threads here, you wanted it to look clean, you can use a felling stitch. It's a spiral, and you're just going to catch a few, as few threads as possible of the bottom side of your fabric, and you're going to come through and catch the hem there. So I'm just grabbing a few of those threads, coming up through the edge of the hem. We've only got our stitches coming through a tiny bit, and if this were a white thread, you wouldn't really see it at all. And that's your felling stitch. So this part down here is going to be where the drawstring goes. So all I'm going to do is turn it up, and we're going to assume that this is the inside of the coif, or the wrong side. I'm going to take my pins, and we want the raw edge to be concealed, so I'm going to roll it over again and just pin that down. So this is going to get seamed down or felled down so that it creates a casing where we can feed through this area the drawstring. Now there's a raw edge here, and I'll have to turn that down as well and hem it. And the hem is going to continue all the way along here and up to here, because this is the part that's going to go around our face, and we want that to have a nice edge. So making sure I don't pin it to the back of the fabric again, I'm just going to roll this part in, and we're going to hem that down. So this is going to take a little bit of time, and you might want to use your iron and press it down before you pin it to make it a little bit easier. Once that's done, I'm going to turn it the other way so that the right sides are together, and we're going to fold it in half. And then this gets pinned here. And we'll do a running stitch from here to here. And then we can press our seam open, roll it under, and fell again. Be careful when you get down to the end here, because this part is going to be the part that is in your center forehead, right around your face, so you want it to look nice. So make sure you fold that over. And hold it in place nice while you are doing your felling stitch. Okay, she's finished, and now we can turn it inside out. And there is our finished coif. So I'll feed the drawstring through here, and then we'll see how it looks. So I'm pressing down the sides of the cross cloth. All the way around the edges, and then I'll just fell the edges down and add the ties on the corners, and the cross cloth will be complete. Cross cloth is coming along. I have two sides hemmed. Got one more side to hem, and then I will add these ties on. Just stitch them down here and here. Cat is optional. So those will get stitched down in the corners there, and then this will be finished. Et voila! This is our finished coif and cross cloth. Everyone, this is Giselle, our lovely model. Giselle, everyone. And I've got the cross cloth tied on her. And here's Giselle with the coif over the cross cloth and the ties wrapped around the top. I was worried about it being too big, but the drawstring seems to fix that, so you can adjust the fit with the drawstring. Now you can put the cross cloth on top of this instead of underneath if you like. You can also embroider one or the other and add a little bit of color. I might go back and do that later, even though you're supposed to embroider before you put things together. I'm thinking it might look good with some flowers on it. And if you don't like the point, if it's too silly for you, the same exact pattern that we just used can be modified. All you have to do is gather, put a gathering stitch in right here, and it will become a rounded coif. Boop. She looks like a Smurf. And that's it. Thank you so much for joining me for this week's craft chat. If you have any questions about the video, feel free to drop them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow Henricus Historical Park on Instagram and Facebook. I hope to see you all next week on the next craft chat. Until then, be safe everyone.